Hi, Dragons. Continuing with part 3. So, President Lincoln started a policy that to quell the riots in New York City, the draft riots that were happening in New York City, by imposing a stipend that anyone who was getting drafted could get out of going to the war if they would pay a $300 gift, as it were. They could substitute that for their draft. And throughout history, people have been using this exemption, okay? And, people get all bent out of shape because our current president did not serve in Vietnam because he had bone spurs, or allegedly had bone spurs, or there's all kinds of stuff going on about that. But, this was true even with the Revolutionary War and the Civil War and, World War I, World War II, all through time. So it's nothing new, okay? And some of our great leaders have used this, even past presidents. So nothing new. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that this has occurred throughout history. So violence then against African Americans took place in forms of lynching, and self-appointed groups would get together and they would decide to mete out justice their way. So they would do lynching, okay? And we saw this happening in a lot of different states. And we had about 3,700 lynchings between 1889 and 1930, and the majority of those did occur in the South, okay? It declined because white fears had been put to rest by the United States Supreme Court that excluded African Americans from the political process, okay? And that did have a lowering effect on the number of lynchings that were occurring. And they did this by having poll taxes and literacy requirements, okay? If you watched the Democratic National Convention a few nights ago, and I watch both conventions all the time because, American history. But anyway, President Obama gave us a speech about voter suppression, and that's exactly what the Supreme Court was doing in this case. Before anyone get any ideas about, allowing slaves to vote, or even freed slaves to vote, the United States Supreme Court put this in place. And there were all these requirements, literacy, and Barack Obama has mentioned, guess the number of jelly beans. And I think even in the movie The Help, they talked about, they showed voter suppression. So it was a very real thing to keep people from having access to power. And so then you saw a segregation that developed. Before the segregation laws, it was a segregation of the equal versus the unequal, the haves versus the have-nots. Even though we had the 14th Amendment saying that everyone was created equally, we saw a lot of inequality, despite talking the talk. We were very good at talking the talk, but not very good at walking the walk. And again, not picking on the United States, you see this in a lot of other countries. Actually, one of the things that I saw in South Africa, which was really cool, I got to see the prison cell that Nelson Mandela was held in, and it's off limits, right? You can't get in there. But I knew a guy, as they say in New England. I knew a guy, and he got me in. And Nelson Mandela wrote on the walls the Constitution of South Africa to show what he was doing in a smart aleck kind of way, was saying, these are the words, this is the talk. You need to stop just talking the talk if you're not going to walk the walk. And it's really cool, but the sad part is that I think they should tear those walls and take those slabs out and put it in a museum so that, it doesn't just go away. But anyway, that was really cool. So yeah, we're really good at talking the talk but not walking the walk. So we had a de facto segregation, if not a codified segregation. So African Americans soon found themselves dependent on those who were their captors. They were economically powerless. They were politically powerless. So they didn't really need lynchings to hold them down because they had a system in place that was holding them down. So there you go. So the rest, as they say, is history, and it's continuing on to this day of the haves and have-nots. So let's turn to social banditry, another historical trend that happened, very violent in the United States. So the period after the Civil War, we had unrestricted capitalism, where people were trying to build up the economy and make a living and live up to what, quote unquote, the American dream. And so there were a lot of people who became myths, legends, okay? And again, they were myths. Not necessarily everything that you heard about them was true. And it wasn't as glamorous as they made it out to be as well. And I'm talking about Wild Bill Hickok, Billy the Kid, Jesse James, and all of that kind of thing. Real men, heroes who would fight and die for the American ideal, okay? And a lot of times, this was not cool. They didn't lead lives of glory and everything else that they were hyped up to be. So they became romantic figures for several reasons. Number one, many Confederate sympathizers admired outlaws who were also Confederates, but they lost the war. So it gave like some shred of like, see, they're really heroes, even though they're outcasts, and the Southern Army lost the war. Two, a lot of small landowners and merchants, they did suffer economically when everybody was making money at the time, and the standard way of operating that they had before was not in their favor. So they blamed their troubles on the banks and the growth of the railroad. You had a lot of immigrants coming in, but they were paid, but substantially lower, like the Chinese. And that's another whole thing, mistreatment of immigrants that was happening in the wake of slavery. And it further led to the disparity of people coming to this country, again, talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Very sad, things like that. So, they sought to do damage to the banks and the railroads. So a lot of them, held up the banks, held up the railroads. And I did put a video in there about a Minnesota, from the archives in Minnesota. You might find that really interesting for some of these social bandits. Okay. And three, it was hard to underestimate the impact of the favorable publicity. I mean, songs were written about them, stories were written about them. Everybody knew about them. Later on, movies were made about them, like Bonnie and Clyde and Al Capone and things like that. So this is my great gateway into Al Capone. We're moving up from social banditry and into the Prohibition era. Not to say that nothing happened between social banditry and Prohibition, but that was an extremely violent time, and it was kind of the birth of organized crime in our country. So the United States, there were a lot of women who did not like what was happening with their husbands, because they were, trying to make a living, but also they were drinking and lawless and things like that. So some of the women and some religious groups decided to petition the government to limit the amount of alcohol that was available. So the United States entered the Prohibition era. Okay, passed the 18th Amendment. A good way to remember what the start of Prohibition was is you used to be able to be 18 years old and you could legally drink. When I was a kid, 18 years old, everybody was like, oh my God, I'm going to be 18. I can have my first legal drink. But now it's 21. And so 21st Amendment overturned the 18th Amendment. So 18 and 21, the two drinking ages, that's a good way for you to remember 18 and 21. Why am I telling you that? Because it's a great true and false question. So the 18th Amendment prohibited the sale and manufacturing, distribution, and importation of alcohol or any kind of intoxicant liquor in the United States, which was really kind of difficult for some places because, number one, there was a lot of immigrants, and immigrants came over with no such prohibition in their country, and they're going to make liquor like they always did, okay? My ancestors included. But that was common, and there's still to this day, Americans have this really interesting, alcohol is bad kind of thing and prohibitive. And, if you put such restrictions on alcohol, then it becomes the forbidden fruit. And then when people turn 21, they just go crazy and they start drinking. When if you had just not had that all along, maybe they would learn to drink responsibly through their whole entire lives. Like in my ethnic family, you drank alcohol from when you were very young. It was unheard of. And I have an orchestra, and we traveled the world, and, people drink all over the world, and they think it's ridiculous when Americans go to their country, and they just like, what do you mean you can't drink till you're 21? We went to Serbia last year, one of the countries I went to last summer, actually, and the Serbians took great pride in sharing their liquor with us and all the kids. Slivovitz, it's great for breakfast. Seriously, we would be there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they would have a buffet for us full of food and liquor and things that they made. And they were rather insulted when the Americans said that the kids couldn't drink because it's unheard of in their country. So anyway, that's my little rant about prohibition. So if you're next to Canada, and Canada had of course the beautiful Canadian whiskey, and a lot of people lived right near the border, they wouldn't let you import it or distribute it. That's going to lead to some people saying, you know what, there's going to be a need for alcohol, so we'll just make our own and we'll do it under the table, which is effectively what Al Capone and his ilk did. Okay, so it happened for two reasons. So all of the distributing happened for two reasons, because it's easy and cheap to transport. Number one, easy, cheap to transport, where beer was bulky and expensive. It could do distilled spirits, right? Two, beer would spoil without refrigeration. Distilled spirits won't. So hey, let's go with distilled spirits. Why don't we? So one of the unanticipated results was that people began drinking more liquor, and more dangerous liquor, because it wasn't controlled, and who knows who made it and what kind of things. No one was there to supervise, like, are they making it safely or not making it safely? Okay, so that was a problem, because people became really ill, blindness, paralysis, death, because of this lack of oversight. The alcohol consumption, research shows that the alcohol consumption declined with Prohibition, and then increased with the 21st Amendment as well, okay? So one measure of consumption and how rampant the Prohibition was, again, going to public health records. So did people have alcohol-related diseases like cirrhosis of the liver? What were their causes of death? That sort of thing. And between 1900 and 1919, the rate was 12 to 17 per 100,000, and then during Prohibition, it dropped from 7 to 9 per 100,000. And then afterwards, it began to increase again when people started drinking again. So there you go. So Prohibition just naturally led to organized crime, okay? And people were going to drink, even though there was a law against it, okay? The same way when we had marijuana laws, and we do in some states still, people are still going to smoke pot because, they're just going to do it because they don't agree with the law. So that just fed fertile ground for organized crime to happen, and they had concealment of the liquor, payment of workers. People were making money during Prohibition, okay, and during the time when it was a forbidden substance. So one of the problems was, if you did drink alcohol and you were subject to cirrhosis of the liver or blindness or paralysis or even death, you had no legal recourse, because what happened to you? You were drinking liquor, which was illegal, okay? So it took away from your rights, legal recourse if something happened to you. And these organized crime organizations became really big. They had no competition because what they were doing was illegal to begin with. So they had to resort to violence to eliminate their competition, okay, which led to lawlessness, okay? So on slide 18, there is a documentary about Al Capone. So for this week's assignment in the forum, I'll put it there as well. I want you to watch the video and discuss violence in America through history and with Prohibition, and what you think of Al Capone, okay? There was a movie about Al Capone called The Untouchables. You can watch that as well. So it would be really good for you to compare the movie The Untouchables, which is really a glorification of Al Capone and of Prohibition, and of the federal servants who became popular during this time, and the actual documentary of Al Capone. So that would be a good thing. I'll put those two sources up there for you. And then at the end of slide 18, we talk about violence in America today. So take a look at that and let me know what you think. And then next week, we will continue with this PowerPoint onto contemporary trends in violence. So that's it for this week. And do your assignment. I'll put that up in the forum. And hopefully I'll see you in person next week. I miss you guys. Remember, it's a great day to be a dragon. See you next time.